Hello everyone, I am Nu-Trix, the synth guy, and today we're talking about a new synthesizer, software synthesizer from Cherry Audio. It's called Mercury 6. Mercury, okay. It's a Jupiter 6 in a software. Now, the Jupiter 6 is a synthesizer from Roland, a classic, a vintage, but it has most time never been seen as like one of the big classic one because, well, the Jupiter 8 took all the place at that point. And let's go back to a little bit of what is the Jupiter 6. Let's go back in time. It's the time where you have the Prophet 5s, out, and yet it's at the moment where it's going to stop. What I mean by that, it's at the moment where the DX7 is coming out. It's at the moment where MIDI is coming out. Actually, the Jupiter 6 is the first synthesizer from Roland which was built with MIDI implementation in it. If you compare it to today's implementation, it's rather simple because it was the first synthesizer and not everything was already decided on. So it's kind of if you get this today, you might be limited in the amount of MIDI messages supported by the Jupiter 6 originally. It actually is using the same chip as you would find in the Prophet 5 for some of the parts of it. You could say it should have some type of the same sound. Not at all, because Roland uses it in his own way, and they always find different ways to make it into creating something different and interesting. The one thing you need to remember is that this came out just when it was the end of analog polyphonic synthesizers, because it was the moment where digital came in. Samplers were coming out, FM was out. It was a huge success. Everybody wanted to go digital. It was kind of the future. So coming out with a new analog synth was like, it will not work unless it's affordable. So they made big decision on the Jupiter 6 to bring down the cost so they could sell it to a good price. And some of it is like, the hardware itself that only had a mono output. Another thing that is important about the Jupiter 6, which is interesting, is the fact that the filter itself is different. The filter has they tweaked the filter in a way so you could have a low pass, band pass, and high pass. So you press low pass or high pass, and if you press it both at the same time, you had a band pass, which is kind of what it is. It's a low pass and high pass at the same time. Surprise. What happens with this kind of twist that they did for it makes it that when you turn the resonation on or the cue very loud, it brings everything else down. It's kind of more cold in that case, or because of that. And a lot of people have in their mind that Jupiter 6 is not as warm as the Jupiter 8, for example, which could not do the same type of shape of filters. And the way the filter reacted was not the same. It gives you another type of sound. And on top of that, there's a lot of different modulation that you couldn't do on the Jupiter 8. And the fact that the LFO one that you have in it goes into the acoustical range. So it's not just a low frequency oscillator. It becomes just another oscillator that can, modulate the different sources. So you can do frequency modulation or vibrato, but into the audible range. So it becomes FM synthesis. And you can do that for amplitude, for filter, so it creates these other type of modulation sounds that you could not do in the other Jupiter series. So it's interesting, and it might be the reason why people associate the Jupiter 6 to a more cold sound or metallic sound, because when you use FM, well, you get more of a metallic sound. When you use ring modulation, you have a sync modulation, which is bidirectional. So oscillator 1 can sync 2 and 2 can sync 1, which is kind of something we don't see often. So again, if you use these features, the sync, the audible range speed of the LFO, and the filter with a lot of resonance, and the fact that you can have band pass and low pass, you can have these more metallic and more, I would say, colder sounds. So yes, it fits in a different space into the Jupiter world, but it's still a very powerful and creative sound generating device. I don't have a Jupiter 6. I never played on it. So I did a lot of reading on it and listened to demos online to hear how people described it. What I'll do is I'm going to actually look at the whole Mercury 6, go through all the features of it, and I'm going to run in parallel a picture of what the Jupiter 6 had to be sure that it is the same feature or it's not there in the original. Like, there's effects in the Mercury 6, which is normal today to have in synthesizers. Of course, in the original Jupiter, there was not this option of effects. So let's go right in. First of all, it is a synthesizer from Cherry Audio. You have all the stuff that you have in Cherry Audio, meaning you've got the browser here by different category of sound you can go in. You have the MIDI controls here. You can record and learn and assign knobs as you want. You have the option of zooming. You can do it like this here, or you can actually take the corner and move it. And you can also focus. If you want to work specifically on one section, you can focus on that section and then move like that. So depending on the size of your screen, depending on how good your eyes are or not, you can actually use this to easily look at a specific section. Let's say you're in the VCO section. You have the little keyboard. If you don't have a keyboard, you can have this to play the notes. You have the gear to go into the settings. You can have the interface. There's different controls you can change. If you look at the panel itself, you have on the far left, you have the volume with a limiter, mostly used when you do stuff like cross modulation and a lot of resonance. It will be here. You have the LFO 1, and you have the rate, the waveform, the sync. So everything we expect out of a LFO and the delay. So meaning when you play a note, how much time is going to take before the LFO starts vibrating. So kind of if you want to do vibrato or tremolo, but only when you sustain, well, the time you would do that, the delay you put that would be the time of your attack. So it doesn't vibrate in the attack, only get when you get to the sustain. That's the logic. But everything here is kind of what you expect. You've got the normal shape with the random. You've got a sync, so it's going to follow the speed of the song. When you go like this, these are now our musical values. Re-trigger, I mean every time you press a key, it's going to re-trigger the LFO. So the LFO is always playing at the same starting point. So it becomes closer to an envelope because it's always the same movement you get. I prefer a lot to use LFO to have random stuff coming in. It's not so random because it's controlled, but it's not re-triggered most of the time when I use it because I like the fact that the LFO comes in whenever you want. But if you would like to use it for something else, it could be used with the re-trigger. Then you've got the VCO section. Let's go into VCO focus. You have here VCO 1 mod. So how the VCO 1 is going to be modulated. Is it coming from the LFO or envelope? So if you remember well, if you send a modulation to the VCO, you're actually changing the pitch. So these two here will change the pitch. So do you want to assign them to VCO 1 or 2 or the two at the same time? So you can assign that here, okay? Then we've got pulse width modulation. The pulse width modulation is for VCO 1, actually 1 or 2. So if you click on it, it becomes a square pulse wave. And when you this is the manual value where it is starting from, and this is the the modulation. Let's actually go. You see? Let's say we don't have anything here. Just listen to the first one. So you're playing with the shape of the pulse and the sound of it, of course. And if we bring that up, and because we're using the LFO, a nice sound. Okay, so you have this is for when you're using pulse width, and if you use square, it doesn't work anymore. It's only for the pulse width. Okay. Then you have cross modulation. So cross modulation is basically if it's like kind of FM, but you don't call it FM because it's Roland. So cross modulation is using the LFO2 and 1 to modulate one each other. So you're frequency modulating both of them. What is this? Okay. I'm going to be back. And I'm back. Sorry for that pause. So, where was I? Cross modulation. Yes. So you can have this here if you want a cross modulation. You see? So you're using VCO2 as a modulation for VCO1. Then you have, well, the two of them, so you can actually turn them on simultaneously, which is something you could not do with the Jupiter 8, for example. So you can have separate of them or turn them on at the same time, and you combine the shape into a more complex shape, and you can still use the pulse instead of the square and still use the pulse width modulation. You have that for the VCO1, you have that for VCO2. The only difference is as the VCO2, you can detune it here, the pitch, and you have the information like 8 plus 10 semitone, 4 plus a couple of semitones, and then you've got synth. Actually, the tuning is for the synth here, so the very precise. And if you want to hear the balance between the two, you have it here. And a little thing you want to check out also is in the VCO2, you have triangular, sawtooth, pulse width. It can be a square if you put it at the right value, and noise. So there's no square that stays always square in this one unless you use the pulse width without changing the width. Then you have a noise here if you want to use the noise part of it. Okay? Then you have VCF, and that's where it's different than the other Jupiter, is that you have an highpass, a bandpass, and a low pass, and the resonance. So right here, bring some volume up. So we hear that movement here. Always remember that the value of the cutoff frequency here is actually the bottom value of the envelope. So if you go from 0 to 10, that's the time. This is the time to go back to the sustain. So the sustain here would be, well, the frequency cutoff that you have here. And depending if you turn it on, you're actually taking this and bringing it back up. If you put it back to 0, 0 is this value. So if this is at this, the 0 of the envelope, the 0 is the value of the cutoff. So if you don't hear anything going on with the envelope, it might be the fact that your frequency of your filter is to the maximum. So you go from maximum to maximum. So you need to bring it down so that the sustained value, bring it down also. So you have that movement of closing or opening, depending on how you set it up. So that's kind of, don't forget that. And then when you push the resonance up, it goes really quick into almost self-oscillating. Now, if you want this to follow the keys, say you want this, you would go keyboard. So the cutoff now is moving with the key values. So that's what the keyboard value is here. If you want to have a filter that opens up and close with the LFO, that's a good option here. Might be too, maybe that's too fast. It all depends on what you want, but it's there. Then you've got the VCA, so the amplifier, controlled by envelope 2, which is this one here, which is for volume, and you also have an LFO for it. So it can be, you can create, let's bring this one down. You can create a tremolo. It's a very slow one, but that could be that. And you've got key follow and velocity. So this is actually, the velocity is, do you want as you press louder or harder on the keys, actually it's faster, but nobody cares. It's going to change the length of the envelope attack, decay, and release, not the sustain, because it's not a time, it's a value. So the velocity will be for that. So it means that if you press harder, you could have a faster and faster attack and decay. Or if you press softer, you would have a longer attack and longer decay, depending on how you want to react. And the key follow is, again, it's going to follow the key. So as you go up the keys, you might have a faster attack and release. When you go down the keys, it'll be a longer attack and release, depending on how you want to do it. So either you put it at 0 and not use it, or you play with it until it feels, I would say it responds to the way you want it to respond to your performance. If I compare this, I'm going to just look at the Jupiter 6 panel, front panel. It's almost exactly the same. The only difference that I see is the fact that here in this section for the low pass, bandpass and highpass, in the case of the original, you had a button for highpass, a button for low pass, and if you press the two at the same time, you would activate the bandpass. In this case, there's no way to press with two finger on my screen unless I would have a touch screen, so you have a bandpass button instead. But the rest of it, it's the same interface for it. Let's go back and see what's under it. Layers. Now that concept is interesting. The concept of layers, actually, if you look on the original one, you don't have this. You don't have that window here of layer. Right? Where you start with the glide, portamento, glissamento, the sync, actually the rate. The sync does not exist on the original one. So that's for the arpeggiator. That's the speed or the time of the glide. Arpeggiator, you've got 4 different range. So range of octaves. Up, down, up and down, random. And if you turn them, actually you only add 2 of them. Up, down, or the 2. Now you have up, down, up and down. This one is probably these 2 together, and the randomize. So wait a sec, I'm going to bring that down. Okay, let's do something like that. Go up, 3 octave, down, up and down, random. Max voice, you did not have that on the original one. Max voice is how many voices of polyphony you want to use, so it's going to be linked with how much CPU usage you're going to have. But we need to start talking about the fact that you can have layers. And layers means that you can have 2 sounds played, or the synthesizer itself exists twice as a, I would say, an upper and lower. Layer 1 or layer 2, but usually if you go to this section here, you would have this here. You have a layer or split. And this is whole, I would say. That's it, whole. This looks almost the same. But what's interesting is the split, now you've got a value. So you see where you're splitting on the keys. So it means that you have a lower and an upper. So if you go lower, you see that you get the value changed here. Upper, value changed again. So there's a different color code for the 2 of them. So you basically have 2 synthesizers, one for the lower, one for the upper. So bass and lead if you want to. You go solo layer, so you can just hear one. Actually, solo layer is useful when you're in the layer mode because all the keys plays the 2 of them, the 2 layers. So if you go solo, then you only hear one of them. And which one is the one you actually play here? So, and if you want to hear both of them. So this is upper, this is the lower. So the 2 of them are different, you know. Let's go back to lower. Let's bring that down. Actually, this one. So that's one sound. You're playing a lower and an upper, so 2 layers at the same time. One is just one note. The other one is an arpeggiator playing the notes. So this is pretty cool. But this is something you see in a lot of Roland synthesizers, even today with the Jupiter, the System 8, is this logic of layering two. And that's where it becomes interesting, is one of them can be monophonic bass line, the other one could be a pad, or one can be a monophonic bass line, the other one could be with an arpeggiator. And it becomes really interesting to play the two with just one sound. Actually, you're playing two of them, and it creates really cool stuff. So you have this here, okay. You have utility. So this is really something that did not exist in the original one, but you can copy the layer. So if you do something cool in layer 1 and say, I want to copy it in layer 2, but I'm going to change the pitch. So I'm going to create a chord or a very big pad. So it's going to be an octave higher or something like that. So you can just copy it and do that. And you also can do that with copy effects. So you can copy the effects and you can import or export layer to memory. So copy somewhere else, go to another synth version of this and copy it back into it. So interesting. Global. So in the original one, you did not have effects. So what you would have here was basically the banks, the memory patches, the write protection. So not to erase the memory, you could save memory to tape. That was the cassette or the disk drive of the time. So in this case, they replaced that with effects. So we've got a distortion, a phaser, a flanger, chorus, a delay, reverb, and you can enable them here. And when you click on them, you have access to values for it. So distortion, phaser, chorus, flanger, delay, ping pong. So all the values that you expect to have are there. So there's a lot to, you go back to global and turn them off here really quickly. So that's how you look at it. And the effects, do you want it to be assigned to a layer itself, or you want it to be assigned to globally the two of them? So it means that you could have a bass line that has, I don't know, chorus or flanger, and you could have a pad on layer upper that could be with delay and reverb, whatever. So it becomes, and again, that's one patch, that's one sound. So really powerful, really fun to play, and it opens up a lot of things when you combine the two of them, either a huge bass, because you would combine two bass together, or a really cool lead that add, two different layers to that. And let's actually give you an example of that. I've got this little bass line here playing. So this one's cool because if I look into just focus, if I focus on, I'm in layer mode. If I focus on upper, that's my upper sound. So that's just a sound that has envelope playing the bass for the envelope, and an LFO that opens up and close. Okay. But the other one is this one. But this one, it'll be really interesting to have it open up and close. So I'm going to take the envelope, this one here, the LFO, and assign that to, but I want it to be slower. And I want it to be synced with tempo. I want to have this on a full measure. So it starts with open, close, okay? And I go back here, turn off the solo. Well, that's one sound. It's actually two sound layered, but that's one sound. Really, it sounds rich. I like that. Really cool sound. Let's go back to here, and let's stop this. I've got this pad here playing. Again, this one is in layer mode. Put one in solo. Just a cool background noise. Let's give it more oomph. As if you listen to the other one, you have the cross modulation increased then. Oh, the layer here is low. That's it. So you can control the volume of each layer using the volume layer, the panning, the tuning of each, and drifting, how analogish it's going to be off, kind of. So now if I go back here, turn the two together, get a bigger sound because the two of them are playing. And layer this one as all of this. Okay. Let's listen to another one. We got this one here. And all together. You have these really wild and complex sound you can create. More, again, cold sound than other type of Jupiter would be able to do. But it has its own space in the world of the Jupiter series. It has its own sound. That's what it is. So Mercury 6, if you're interested, look it up, check it out. Cool thing. It's not a synth we see often being recreated virtually. It's just kind of in between. And it's not a Jupiter 8, it's not a Jupiter 4. It has its own presence and sound. It has also its own reality in the history of music and synthesizer. It's just somewhere where times were changing and they made decision to make it different. And because of that, today it has a little bit of a different sound because of that. Pretty cool. That's it. Stay safe, make more music, and see you soon. Cheers.